welcome to the show.
Yeah. Hey, Vic, excited to be here, man.
I'm excited to have you on. This is a conversation I love to enjoy having, and I know you have a wealth of knowledge. You have a history of being I guess it's a serial entrepreneur, right? You have multiple different, right? I guess that's a new term I've heard many times. But some good, some bad, as you said, and we'll get into all that fun jazz. But before we get into things, tell us a little bit about, what's your journey? How'd you end up getting to where you are today? What's that? And I know it's a loaded question, but don't mind sharing a little bit of how you ended up where you are now.
Yeah. Well, I'll skip the part about being born in Virginia and all that, and just kind of get to. So the long and short of it is, I was kind of I think a sort of a product of society in a sense that, I was sort of after the American dream. Get a good education, work really hard, and you'll succeed. And I never really took the time to define what that definition was. My definition of success was different, a little bit different in the world. And mine really was the ability to sort of control my own destiny, right, and to live the life that I wanted to live and be who I wanted to be. And so off to school I went and studied engineering, and found out pretty quickly. In fact, it was in I was a co-op student, and it was in which was the biggest blessing I think I ever had when I was in engineering, was to sit in a boardroom. It wasn't a boardroom. It was a small conference room, about 8 by 10. There were 6 or 7 people in there, and we used to make these really expensive network test equipment boxes when the internet was sort of just coming along, and they were custom made. And the long story short was, there was an argument for 2+ hours about the color of the little rubber booties that should go in this $80,000 box. And I'm like, I just, is there a cliff nearby that I could jump off of? And, and I'm like, if this is like a harbinger of things to come, it's not what I want to do. And I just kind of went that route because I was good at math and science and liked it. But anyway, long story short, went into business while I was in college. I was fortunate enough to go into business with my sister and brother-in-law and do some things, and it developed pretty quickly, and we had a pretty good level of success. And right out of school, didn't work in engineering long, went into business full time, and then my wife and she helped me for about 10 years, and that was kind of sort of the genesis of this idea. Okay, yeah, you can control your own destiny. And I learned a lot about business, and from that, went through several different business iterations, but landed in the late 90s in real estate finance, and I loved it. And that was an opportunity to work with business owners and entrepreneurs and people that were really sort of my tribe, that also kind of flew to a different message, and wanted that control and that freedom. And so I served them a lot in various real estate finance practices. A lot of times it was buying investment properties, things like that. But what I noticed was that a lot of these folks, they had successful businesses and they had really good incomes and cash flow, but they weren't they didn't own the space that they were in. And so kind of that's where we led to where we are now, where our real focus is helping business owners buy the commercial spaces that they're in. And we can get into that. But so it's kind of a journey really of this idea of thinking, I sort of knew what I wanted, how I wanted to live, and I didn't really like people telling me what to do, and I didn't really like being constrained to one place. So I went off to school, and like most people, and fortunately I was able to pivot fairly early and sort of escape that.
I love it. It sounds like it was a nice evolutionary process of how it has led to where you are today. I love how you're passionate about helping business owners own their own space. Why is it that when it comes to, we're very big about owning our own house versus renting? Like, you don't hear about people saying, I just want to keep renting a bigger house and get a bigger house and rent a bigger house and rent it. You just don't hear that. I mean, but you will hear the opposite. Like, I have this house, I'm in here. I think a mortgage, you might know this better than me, but I remember a mortgage guy was telling me the average person lives in lives in a house for like 7 years and they're on to the next one. And right. I was like, that's great for the banking industry. But long story short, because you look at interest and all that fun jazz. But long story short, I'm like, we're always looking to level up when it comes to owning, but when it comes to the business side, and this was me too initially, I was like, I'd rather just rent. I don't want to own. Then I have to deal with a property and all these other things until I started learning taxes on that aspect of that life. So why is it that we in the personal all about owning, but in business we don't really think about that?
Well, I think it's a number of reasons, but I think partially most business owners are, glorified technicians, right? If you go back and read the E-Myth, Michael Gerber, and all that, you have a professional that goes into business, a dentist, a chiropractor, maybe someone owns an HVAC company, and maybe they came in with a trade or a skill, and now they're going to go apply it on their own versus working for somebody else, and so they spend their time working what we say in the business kind of heads down, and they're so focused on all the things that are involved with owning a business and running it and then maybe growing it and hiring employees. It can become overwhelming. And then buying property is something that's foreign. Commercial property is foreign to most people because you typically think you may have this whim at some point, like, oh, maybe I should buy a space maybe when the lease renewal comes up. But generally, for a lot of business owners, it's sort of the last thought because, again, their heads down, they're focused on their business, and then, oh, now I've got to make a decision in 30 days. Well, you're not going to buy a commercial space in 30 days. It takes time. It takes some diligence, and so I think that's one reason. I think another reason is there's a misconception out there with a lot of people that it takes a large down payment to get started with a business space. And business buildings can be more expensive than residences and that sort of thing. I think that a lot of people also, you talk about buying your own home. Well, you buy your own home for a number of reasons. One is because you want those checks to go into something that you own versus just padding a landlord's pocket. But the other thing is that you mentioned tax advantages and the ability to maybe move up every 7 years. And I think that statistic is about right. People, about every 7 years they move. But sometimes people, when they move, they don't sell the house. They move into another house and they rent out the house they have, right? And so they create a trail of property that they accumulate. And I think, I don't know, maybe people lately have become more disillusioned with the real estate, not the real estate, but the stock market and everything. It's kind of up and down and whatnot. And more people like that tangible, putting their hands on property, right, and owning property. But again, they think, okay, well, if I buy this building that my business is in, it's again 20% down on $1 million building is a lot of money, and I might need that money to run my business. And so they don't realize you can do it for a whole lot less than that in most cases. Owner-occupied commercial real estate is much easier to get into if you have a profitable business. And so I think those are kind of the primary reasons, just heads down, focus, not thinking about it until things, it's popped in your lap. And then, you're forced into it. One client I had this year, he's owned a couple pizza restaurants, and he same thing, 8 years in the pizza business, a couple of local restaurants, rented buildings, built out one of the kitchens, spent, I think, $80,000 building the kitchen out, his process and all that. One day the landlord knocks on the door and says, "Hey, we're going to sell the building that you're in." And so he's like, "Whoa, what do you mean we're going to sell the building?" And so he was forced to make a decision. And fortunately, in his scenario, the landlord gave him the first right of refusal to buy the building because, I mean, what's he going to do? It's a local business. He's going to have to scramble to find a new location. His customers aren't going to drive more than a couple miles probably for a little pizza place, right? So he might have to start all over. And so for him, it was kind of a shock out of the blue, but also an opportunity. And I tell business owners all the time that you want to make a move before you're forced into it. You want time, and you want to do your due diligence and be thoughtful about it. But the short answer is it's not as difficult as people think when they sit down and really engage in the process.
I mean, even from just the number side of things, it's just like you were saying earlier about with a mortgage or owning a house. It's part of that paycheck comes back to you in some way, shape, or form. And it's the same thing even with a business. It's like that money you're spending, you're putting that back into your maybe not that business, maybe you structure it differently or something, but it's still coming back to you in some way, shape, or form. Plus appreciation and all that fun stuff that comes with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, typically most business owners will structure it basically they have their operating business that they run, and then they'll now start a real estate business basically. So two businesses from one, where they have a real estate holding company, which you own, and that buys the building, and then your business, your operating business, becomes a tenant or of that business. So they're renting from you basically, and so there's some great tax advantages there. You can take the deduction as a business expense from the operating business, and then you can depreciate some of the building and accelerate a lot of it with cost segregation to offset the income on the building. So you're kind of getting it on both sides, right? Coming and going from a tax standpoint. And as you mentioned early on when you started talking about taxes, I mean, once you start having a successful business, then the tax man becomes he becomes your friend, right? Because he's wanting to get deeper and deeper in your pocket, wants to get know you more and more. And the reality is they phase out deductions as your income goes up, right? So it gets harder and harder to take advantage of, the we call it, typical deduction. So you need a way to leverage that. So yeah, you've basically now split your business into two. And what a lot of people will do, Vic, is they'll build a building or buy a building that's got space that's larger than what they need for their current operational situation, because they expect to either A, grow over the next few years and need to expand, or B, they want to bring a tenant in and not only be a landlord to their own business, but to have someone else come in. It could be a complementary business. It doesn't have to be, but perhaps you have a veterinarian business, and then you want to bring in a grooming business, as well, that somebody else owns, so you can rent them part of the space. Or you can start your own grooming business as a secondary business for your veterinary business. But the long and short of it is you have the space, and you can have somebody else start paying the freight on your building, on your space. And so net, you could be spending less money owning your own building versus renting. And oh, by the way, you don't have to worry about rent increases that are built into the lease or possible lease non-renewals. And I've got a guy right now building a 12,000 square foot flex warehouse space, and he's a high-end remodeling company, and he also just started an HVAC company, but he's going to use about 7,000 feet of the building. He's already got the other 4 or 5, I think it's about 4,000 leased out. But that 4,000 at current market rates is paying almost the entire mortgage on the brand new building. And so now somebody else is paying the freight on the building. It's appreciating. He gets the tax advantages, and he's netting all the money he was currently paying in rent is now coming back to his bottom line. And so it's a win across the board. And oh, by the way, if his business continues to grow on the curve that it is, he can just expand right in.
I think that it just makes perfect sense. I mean, because I know in my office I was renting at one point, and then I started doing calculations, and I was like, how can I get my rent to be lower but not pay rent? I asked my landlord, can I condo this? And he's like, yeah. He goes, well, I'm open to it. He was wanting a way higher price, and I'm like, hold up, that's not the calculations that I was told that how this should work. What I was doing is I was looking at the numbers, and I looked at my rent, and I said I could actually save money per month if I buy it. And then I talked to my accountant, and I was like, tell me all the tax advantages I get. And then she just wrote a whole list down, and I looked and I go, why didn't anyone tell me this sooner? And I was like, all right, we need to figure this out. We didn't go forth though, because one, my landlord, he was a lawyer, but he was like, wanted way too much. And I was like, this is just way out of the ballpark. I'm like, and then number two is like, we didn't really like the space we had because a real estate agent moved next door. And they took up all our parking spots, so my patients barely had parking. And I'm like, if this is the issue we're having, I'm like, it ain't worth buying. We'll just look for something down the road. And then like 4 years later, we ended up moving out of state. So I'm like, it all worked out. If I ended up buying that, I would have had a building, and I wanted to move, and it would have helped me. So, but I love what you're sharing though about that, because there is so much tax advantages that you can do. And if you don't mind sharing a couple of the big ones, because I think a lot of times business owners, it does, we look at things. One thing I did look at before that kind of pushed me away a little bit was I was worried about that down payment. Like, that's a big chunk of money I'm going to have to pay. I'm like, I can use that for so many other things in my business. Right. That was one of them. And I know you said there's ways you don't have to most of the time. But the tax advantage stuff, that was a huge eye opener for me.
Yeah. So down payment, I mean, if you most business owners develop a relationship with their local banker, right? I mean, that's what you're told to do. Banks market as, we're so small business friendly, and which is a big laugh. Particularly the bigger the banks, the less friendly they are to small businesses. But it is definitely an act that they play. And generally, when they saunter down to the local bank, and most of them are going to want 20% down, sometimes 25% down. So it's a pretty steep, as you said, it's a large amount of money to take out of your business and tie it up in the bricks and mortar, right? When you could use it for marketing, for expansion, for growth. And if you have a growing business, they eat cash, so you need to have cash, right? Well, you don't need that, though. I mean, you can get in. We have people get into their own buildings for 0% down, depending on the state of the building, and their business and their cash flow. Typically, it's about 10 in most cases. Is kind of the rule of thumb we like to use for most people, but we can go definitely less than that. We're big advocates of you maintaining a large amount of working capital as well, because we want you to be able to weather any storms and to be successful. And, if you suck all the money out of the business, it's just not good for anybody. So down payment really in those scenarios isn't really nearly the issue. And to your point about having the right space, that is a critical consideration. I mean, obviously you don't want to buy a space that you don't think is going to serve your business. And again, this is why it takes some time and due diligence to try to figure out, okay, where am I today? Where do I think I'm going to be in the next 3 to 5 years? Where's the market? And there are different strategies to approach that. It might be, again, that you buy this space, like perhaps maybe you're going to expand and set up, multiple locations or whatever. So maybe you'd want to keep a location when you move to a different area. We had a dentist that did that. His whole goal coming out of dental school was not really to be a dentist, but to own a dental business. And so after 2 or 3 years, renting space, he bought the first building, set up his practice, and that started to go really well. And a few years later, he said, okay, I'm going to buy another building across town, hire another dentist. And so he did that. And then over the course of about 12 years, now he has, I think, 5 locations. So the process for him was, I'm gonna open multiple locations. And the interesting thing is, each one of those locations, even though he has someone else in it and operating it, it's still his business. So it becomes what we call owner occupied commercial real estate, which again is very, very business owner friendly in terms of low down payment and terms, as opposed to if you're going to go out and buy a strip mall or something, or a multifamily building where, okay, that's a true investment. You're not going to be putting your business in there. I mean, you might put a part of your business in a strip mall, but mostly people buy strip malls because it's an investment opportunity. And so in those situations, you're definitely going to look at 20, 25, 30% down. So, and as far as the tax benefits, and I'm going to put an asterisk here and say I'm not a CPA, right? So consult your accountant, CPA, in every situation like this. But again, structuring like we talked about before, where you have 2 companies, gives you some advantages where your rent now is a tax deduction, and so you're currently enjoying that. But what you're not getting is on the other side, you get this cost segregation opportunity with your building. So you can depreciate a part of your building. So everyone's familiar, if you're in investment real estate, where you can depreciate like your rental property to offset some passive income. The commercial world allows you to do that too. And for a little bit of money, you can pay an accounting firm, or there's some firms that do it's a cost segregation study, where they'll go in and they can depreciate certain items in the building, certain fixtures, at a faster rate than the actual real estate. And so you can charge yourself a market rent on the building side, and then your business is deducting that. So that's not showing as income into you, right? So your building is now depreciating against that. And so basically your building has a net income of 0 or a loss, passive income. And so that's kind of the primary, opportunity. There are other tax advantages in there too. But that's kind of the big strategy that people want to use. And again, as you have to charge a market rent, but there's nobody that says you can't raise your rents on yourself every single year, right? as you raise your rents on yourself, as long as you're in the market, and again, talk to your CPA about your market rent and what that would be, then you can offset a lot of that. You can also potentially, from a maintenance standpoint, you can hire people, family members and things like that. There's some things you can do that you can't do if you're, renting a traditional space.
I love that. Thanks for sharing all that. And it's like, even when you think about like when you were talking about all this, I was thinking of when we're talking about businesses owning and so forth. You look at McDonald's, everyone thinks it's in the restaurant industry, but they're really in the real estate industry.
Yes.
And it's one of those things where when you were just sharing all that, it was a thought I had earlier on, and I lost it, and it came back, and I was like, oh yeah, the McDonald's, I got to bring that up. But it is, I love the tax stuff that you can do in so many ways. I mean, you're paying rent, your business, the account or the holding firm is making the money, you depreciate it off. It's a wash across the board. I mean, it's one of the things that you play the game, because taxes is a game. Yes, I'm not, when I give clients like tax advice, I'm always like, listen, understand that I'm not an accountant. Go talk to your accountant to confirm all this. I don't want to give you something that I could be wrong on. I am not a professional in this. I just study things, and I'm sharing the stuff that I've learned. But it is one of those things where you can use that. And when you play the game, I was told early on in business school, if you want to be a good business person, learn taxes, because then you'll learn how to play the game a lot better. And I was like, okay, we'll see how that goes. And as I got deeper into business, it was like, all right, I'm making so much money here. I don't want to pay taxes on all that. How do I play the game so I can minimize my tax liability, right? I think tax liability. When it comes to that, so I'm doing everything in the way that the game is done, and being able to live to be able to do things in a certain specific way. So I love that.
And then another way there is with the 1031 exchange is a legal tax, tool, I guess you could say, that a lot of business owners will use if you have your building. And again, you're in it 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. It's appreciated in value. Somebody else is maybe helping you pay down the loan because you've got a tenant. You want to expand and go to another building, then you can take the equity in your building. You could sell it, and then instead of paying taxes on that gain, you can roll all that into the new building. And you don't have to do that. You could leverage the equity for other things. We see people use that equity for a lot of things, which is a whole nother point. I mean, there's a whole nother side to this, and in terms of like the savings and control, it's the wealth building opportunity. Again, when you look at your home and you look at real estate, obviously markets can be somewhat cyclical in the short term. Nobody's got a crystal ball on today or tomorrow, but if we look back 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, real estate has gone up, fairly consistently, right? There's only so much dirt out there. And so, most smaller business owners, when they get to a point where they're making a good income, they have a good income, but in most cases, they raise their lifestyle to the income, and so they're spending so much of what they have. And so at the end of the time, when they just decide they want to retire or sell, well, if you want to sell your practice and you don't have the real estate, then you're selling a lot of blue sky, and so the value of your business is not nearly as great as if you were selling a business with real estate. The other thing is that if you own the building, 10, 20, 30 years is going to pass in business, right? And so at the end of that 10, 20, 30 years, you want to retire or maybe do something different. You either have an asset that's paid for and now you can sell, or you can lease it to someone else, or you don't. And so, but either way, you've spent a lot of money in whether it was on rent or in your lifestyle. I've got a great friend. She's a doctor like you. She's an OBGYN. Her husband sort of cajoled her into buying her building about 12, 13 years ago. And she still has a great local practice. And long story short, the building's paid off. 2 years ago, one of these larger medical practices came in. They're buying up the small independents and like, hey, we want to bring you into our HMO or whatever it is. So she sold to them for a nice payout, negotiated another, basically 3 or 4 years that she could work until she wanted to retire. And oh, by the way, they wanted to keep her building and rent the building from her because that's where all her patients come. That's the practice, right? And so now she's got this, 7-figure building paid off that's paying her a nice 5-figure income every single month that someone else is paying the freight on. So she would have missed that entire opportunity had she not, said, I'm going to go ahead to her husband saying, hey, you need to buy this building. So there's a lot of lost opportunity, I think, Vic, for businesses that are long-term in scale, locally based. There are some caveats, right? If your business is fledgling and new, whatever, it's not a good idea to be thinking about buying your building, right? You need to focus. But if you're past that point, you think, okay, now we're on a sort of, we've got a vision and we're making progress, and we think the next 3 to 5 to 7 years look good, and now you're in a position that you need to be thinking about that.
I love that. I could talk so much more to you, Paul, on all this stuff. I love talking this stuff. But how can people like follow you? Learn more about what you do, your business services, and all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wrote a book called Un-Lease Your Business, Unlock Wealth, Autonomy, and Control by Buying Your Building and Firing Your Landlord. And it is available. I give it away for free. You just had to pay shipping. If you go to my website, ownyourbuildingnow.com, ownyourbuildingnow.com, you can pick up a copy. I suggest you check that out. It'll answer 1 million questions, goes through the process. And in addition to that, on the same site, I've got a 2-minute assessment, kind of a self-assessment. Basically asks the question, is buying commercial property right for me? And it's free, and it gives you a customized response based upon the answers to the questions in 4 main categories. And so you can get a sense of kind of where you are in the process for that. And then, of course, for somebody who's further down the curve and they're like, yeah, I'm really seriously looking to do this now, then they could just schedule a time and we can have a conversation, an ownership strategy conversation, and just kind of see if it makes sense. Our perspective is we like to work with someone who's educated about the process. And that's really our whole focus, because the more you know, the more, you can make an intelligent, informed decision. And, there are a lot of ways to skin the cat, right? And so we don't pigeonhole any one person, any one program or thing. We lay it out and say, okay, here's the market, here are the options based upon your situation. And so you make an intelligent decision on whether you want to move forward or not, and how.
I love that. For all the listeners, definitely check that information out. I'll have it in the show notes. Paul, thank you for coming in and sharing this wonderful wisdom and enlightening us with all this, the options and the bigger vision of it all, right? And why it's important, and all the layering into there that we dove into there. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, Vic, it was great. I appreciate you having me on today, man. It's a lot of fun.